Web3 is about creating a system where you have a voice, but you are also part of those communities and you have ownership and access to these networks.
Hi, my name is Ronald Ghosh, and it's my pleasure to host this episode of Fintech and Web3 Founders. This is the first episode of 2023, and joining me today, zooming in from London, Stani, the founder of Aave, and also now this new social media app protocol, Lenster and the Lens Protocol. Stani, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Ronit, for having me here. It's a good start for 2023, and as we were talking in the background, that's, we haven't done podcast for 3 weeks, and you too. So let's see how it goes.
I know, I forgot how to start these things. I've been sitting on the beach in Dubai, just getting fat and eating. So so now we have to think about. Anyway, I have been listening to some of your back catalog this afternoon, and I made a lot of notes. So here it is. So we're gonna chat a little bit about obviously DeFi and Aave and how you got into that, and then decentralized social media. Before we get into that, for the folks who don't know you, Stani, tell us a little bit about yourself. Stani, before he became a DeFi celebrity, Stani is a young man, Stani is a boy. You grew up in Finland, right? You went to college in Helsinki.
That is right.
You were a law student, but when you were a kid growing up, tell us a little bit about young Stani.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things I did was quite a lot involved in sports, technology, and music. So I really love to do athletic stuff. So I used to play football, ice hockey, and other interesting things at very young age. So I then, at one point I had like so many practices at a day that I couldn't do anything else. But one thing that was very exciting for me is that at some point very early in my age, my dad bought me and my brother actually a computer to share. And that kind of was the interesting time for me, because that was the time when internet started to be a new thing and a window to a new world. And that introduced me, obviously, everything that you can read on the internet, but also gaming. And I started to do and play a lot of games, video games across the internet as well. But that effectively was something that drove me into this idea that, first time ever you have actually a connectivity across globally, and you can play games with anyone. That was very fascinating for me, and pretty much led to me to actually even build things on the online. So that's how I grew up: sports and the internet.
And you grew up in Helsinki? Yeah,
it's actually quite interesting. As a country, Finland is quite a nice place to grow up, because
right.
You have a ability to learn whatever you want to learn. You have a lot of opportunities. But for me also, when I was growing up, I had a lot of freedom. So
right.
And I could dedicate time a lot to building things, playing games, and that was quite nice to be. And I really, I go often to Finland still. I think it's an amazing country. And one of the big parts that still stuck with me is that the nature there. So the nature is very important for people, and that's what I care about as well.
Yeah. For people who've never been to Finland, I've been to Finland a few times. Actually, I remember freezing my bits and pieces off several times in Finland. Once it was just so cold, I was like, I think it was like late 1990s, early 2000s. Myself and my future wife, we were there in Helsinki together, and she wanted to go shopping, and I was like, it's just too cold. I just couldn't leave the hotel. It was so cold, and she went out shopping. But I guess you grew up with it, so you're used to this. And so people who don't know Finland, talk a little bit more about that sense of, you mentioned two words there, freedom and nature, right? And I think it ties into, well, academic freedom or intellectual freedom, or, Finland regularly scores at the top of these, school assessment league tables. The average education in Finland, if you're an average, ordinary kid, is just like off the charts. What makes it so good or special, do you think? And just get a feel of, you're sitting in the UK or the US or here in Dubai, you don't know anything about Finland. Just give us a bit more of a flavor of that place and how it's shaped you.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because it really is something that, shapes your growing up and the person you are, and affects a lot your personal life as well. So when you're studying in Finland, many of these things you don't really realize, but it's, as a society, it's quite democratic. So everyone really has the same equal opportunity to same education. For example, people live pretty similarly, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But you can study anything you want, and you don't really pay anything for what you're studying, and that makes it very unique, because it doesn't matter what family you are growing up in, you have that equal opportunity. And the way the schools are programmed is that, for example, when I was in school, we didn't have homework at all. So we have weekly objectives, and if you don't finish those weekly objectives, then you have some homework on the weekend. But also, it's you, the student, who sets those weekly objectives. So that was quite an interesting experimentation. But that is actually one of the reasons I also think why access to, not just like education, but other things like finance and, the internet is valuable. And that's definitely something that I notice when I travel a lot, and I ask, how is the education system in different countries? And I start to compare. I realize that, the education and the opportunities I had, growing up in Finland, are a bit different than across globally. So that definitely affected how I work today, for example.
Now, fast forward, you're growing up with computers, you're growing up with games. Did you get into coding as well, or were you more of a user and a gamer? How deep did your interest in computers go?
I started coding very early, mainly because my brother, who was 5 years older, he started to work quite a lot on the operating system. So we're both big fans of the Linux ecosystem. Obviously, Linux is also, it's an operating system that is used 99.9 something of the computers, mainly servers, globally, but it's from Finland as well. So Linux is from Finland, and it had its own community there. But we were excited about experimenting with different things, and he was excited about building hardware, tweaking operating systems, kernels. I was more high level, so I like to actually put something into the internet and see how other people's are interacting with it. So I was more excited about the web than the hardware, and I started to build my first web pages with PHP language. I think it was 13 or 12 years, somewhere there. And a couple of years later, when the Web 2 movement started a bit more, and we started to see that it's not anymore internet to read, but internet to interact. Reddit became big, and all the social media platforms. I started to get more excited about Ruby on Rails, which is what Twitter was originally built upon. And at some point, just a couple of years later, I was getting into Fintech applications. So I was like excited about how we could solve actually the transactioning on the internet. So the whole teenage years was quite a lot about building too.
And you had all this freedom because of the education system in Finland to just play around. You didn't have loads and loads of homework and.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually quite interesting because, you know, a lot of people for their startups, you know, they drop out colleges, you know, universities to pursue their dreams. I pretty much dropped out of high school. So I dropped out of high school to code for a year and a half, and then I got back into high school to finish my degree. So it was
No way. And what age was that?
it was quite. I think it was 15. So
like at
15, 16.
You just left high school for a year.
Yeah, exactly.
What did your parents say?
They didn't say anything. They were just wondering what I was doing on the computer, but you know, they were.
So you just like dropped out of school for a year, and what were you doing? You were building websites, and what kind of websites are you building?
At that time, I was quite excited on building. It was more of an experimental, I'd say, application where you could find all the guides that you want to online. So it was basically what WikiHow is today before it was launched. So it was more of like a global way of creating guides to other people on how to manage your money, how to manage your daily life, you know, tips for travel. And that was just like I never wanted to build anything as a startup. It was always a project that I just could learn something new and learn how people interact with your creativity. And that's how it was, you know. And that's why I also decided that, you know, this is I eventually need to go back and study a bit more in school. But it really, I learned a lot.
So then around 16 or so, you go back to school, you finish your schooling, you go to college, and you become a law student, right?
Yeah, I studied, I applied first time, I didn't get in, second time applied. So here's the thing in Finland is that you know, you can apply to any school, right? So you don't necessarily need to have even good grades in your universities, but there's a lot of competition because the school is free for everyone, pretty much. And, you know, and when I got there, I was always excited about getting a law degree because at that point, you know, it was a few years later in my 20s where I actually was excited about fintech, and I was excited about working capital, you know, and how we can make global financial markets. And there was a lot of discussion about regulation all the time. And that was the time when we had peer-to-peer lending coming in, you know, and it became successful to some extent, crowdfunding. And I was excited about learning the law part. And I went to law instead of computer science. And end of my studies, I just decided that, you know, I want to find some technology that really could empower, you know, those areas globally and have accessibility. And that's where I found Ethereum.
And we'll come back to Ethereum and Aave and how Aave is a Finnish word. And we'll come back to, but let's just stick to law and high school. And you said that while you were in high school, you got interested in fintech. And, you know, people get interested in gaming in high school, or they get interested in social media or reading or science, whatever, sports. Very few people have told me, and I've looked at this topic for a long year, very few people have said to me, Ron, when I was in high school, I was interested in fintech. I mean, people just don't get interested in payments. Like, people like spending money in high school, but like how payments works, I mean, that's a kind of pretty esoteric thing in high school to be interested in, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, spending was part of that. So like, I was interested in like how you could spend funds easily, and you know, it has to do quite a lot of with how I was grown up and using the internet, because you know, you have not just access to all this, you know, global information, but you have access also to e-commerce, so you could actually buy anything that you want globally. And back in then get it in a week, or you know, in a couple of weeks or a month into Finland, whatever, depending what you're ordering. But you know, payments is a big part of it. And for me, what's what was very exciting is that regarding payment, beyond payment, is that like how finance works and how how people, like how businesses gets funded, how people are getting funded, and how you could remove a lot of those barriers. And I also like the concept of everything has value. How could you use this value as a collateral, to unlock some of the value, to use it somewhere else? And that's why I read a lot about finance in general. And it's definitely weird thing to like in that age, but it was quite natural.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have a kid who's 8, almost 9, and we opened a virtual bank account for him, like these kind of prepaid debit card things in Dubai. He wants to spend, right? Both online and offline, he wants to spend. So he wants a debit card. So maybe when he's 16 or 15, he'll be interested in the payment system as well. But and what were you buying? Like, what were you buying around the world? That got you interested in payments. Like, what kind of things? If it's suitable for,
maybe he could be interested already in DeFi. Who knows? And depositing
He's
into
super interested
Aave,
in social media. I can give him his YouTube channel later if you want to subscribe. But
oh yeah, we need a Lens profile for him for sure.
What's the youngest? What's the youngest user you've got on Lens right now?
It's an interesting question because we really don't know, which is a good thing, because we normally, when you sign up for a social media platform, you basically give a lot of data. You give data about your email details, age and whatnot. So Lens is a protocol, obviously. So anyone can create a profile, and then that profile is effectively the protocol doesn't know data about you, which is good because you have a way to privately publish content to your audience. But at the same time, it's the applications that can then set other kinds of requirements, like what's your, what name you want to use, what avatar you want to use, how old are you. But I know that in general, social media is used earlier than finance for sure for people. So I assume it's the same.
Yeah. And I think it's, definitely, people in there, what are the stats of Roblox and Minecraft now, right? I mean, these are like the tweens, right? The 8 to 13-year-old crowd or whatever. But going back to your personal journeys, there you are at law school, you're learning all about traditional legal contracts, and then you get to smart contracts and Ethereum, and walk us through that journey of discovery. Like, when did you first come across, whether it's smart contracts or Ethereum, and what was the eureka moment? Like, you're like, this is it, this is what I was looking for? Or how did it all happen? Which year is this? We're talking about half a dozen years ago or something, or?
Yeah, it's 2016. And it was a big year because there were sort of things happening on Ethereum. There was the DAO hack and all the things related to that. Also, it was like at a time where this concept of dApps, decentralized applications, came, that you have this smart contract infrastructure that is running on a public blockchain like on Ethereum, and then you can have an interface to interact. So you have like an application that just doesn't it's unstoppable, which made it very exciting. But for me at that point, there was another interesting thing that was happening, is that a first decentralized exchange was built, was called EtherDelta. It was summer 2016, and pretty much no one was using it, and I was thinking like, wow, this is super exciting because, you don't need to transact on a centralized exchange, give your money to someone's position and being able to retrieve them, but you can build program a smart contract, which is kind of like a legal agreement, but it's enforcing itself. So all the rules will apply, and no one can go and arbitrarily tweak those rules. And I was thinking that this is fascinating because now you can trade, but you can do other things that I was thinking about. You can use that value of those cryptographic assets and use them as a collateral or earn on them. And at that time, no one really used EtherDelta. There was even a Reddit post about like why, like this is so brilliant, why no one is using it. And it took almost like 6 to 8 months, I would say, to get some decent traction. And it took like a year and a half to get like good traction in that small DeFi audience. So that was the year. And I think for me what's exciting is that, you know, if EtherDelta and decentralized exchanges and we can exchange value on chain, we can do other things on chain. So we can actually unlock value, use the assets as a collateral. And that's where the first project and MVP I created was called Aave Lens, short for Ethereum lending. So I created this idea of what if you can use value as a collateral, and then you can draw liquidity as well by matching the people who want to borrow and the people who want to earn. And we created this kind of like a marketplace. That was 2017. And when a lot of community came around the idea, I was thinking that, you know, maybe people actually want to see this being built further. So that's where things started to take more excitement.
And then you rebranded ETHLand or expanded it, and you called it Aave, which I only recently discovered was a Finnish word for ghost. Why did you call it Aave? Why ghost? And explain how it took off. Like, why is Aave one of the more widely used or popular DeFi protocols out there? How did that happen?
I think there's interesting things regarding that. I think the main thing is that we constantly innovated all the time. Like, what could be how we can improve the current thing we have, and how we can make something very appealing to users in the space. And that was the DeFi space. And the DeFi space was roughly from, you know, it was like 5,000 users to 10,000. It was very small. You know, we created a improved version of the ETHLand smart contract system we called the Aave protocol. And effectively we used a pool model, which was becoming popular with the automated market makers. And this pool model was exciting because you know, you could draw liquidity at any time, so you don't need to order match the users, so you reduce the friction, and you can offer yield to anyone who supplies assets, and they don't need to get order matched to a borrower. And it became very easy to use. And before we launched the Aave protocol, we also added this idea of flash loans. So you could borrow anything you have on stored in those smart contracts, the value for one Ethereum block, and you can return it. And we were thinking that this is an interesting idea to experiment. And last features that we added, we almost didn't want to add it actually. And when we launched in January, 8th of January, I think was 2020, like before the whole DeFi summer, you know, what happened is that people got excited about what we built and the innovation, but also there were developers that were creating applications and arbitragers that are started to use flash loans, and it became kind of like something we brought into like DeFi pop culture. And that is the year where, you know, everyone started to realize like how amazing DeFi is, because you can build products and you can compound them into with a composability. So, you know, you can build, you might have an AMM and you might have the Aave protocol, but you can build something new on top, for example, a way to swap interest. And because every single application is on the same network, you have this ability to these applications talking each other permissionlessly. And that was like what took DeFi a bit further. And we saw a lot of innovation and brought a lot of traction for Aave protocol.
So when is the kind of takeoff point, first the inflection point and then the takeoff point in your view on DeFi? Is like always still getting there?
It's a good question. I definitely think there was a wave of excitement of what can be built and what DeFi is.
Yeah.
And second interesting thing is that we really are still quite small, the whole Web3 space. And it just takes a bit more time to people find decentralized finance. I mean, even today, the user base of the Aave protocol is growing. So, but it just takes time to actually grow and become more familiar to people who are new to the space, who believe in access to, finance globally, into permissionless accessibility, but also the transparency that DeFi brings. If you go look into the Aave protocol and look all the exposure that is happening there, you see all this transparency and across the whole DeFi ecosystem. So you can actually price the risk very well. And this is something very unique that doesn't exist in, for example, in mainstream finance.
So DeFi, DeFi 101 almost. Why do we need it? If someone says to you, I think I was listening to a podcast where you said actually, and I hope I'm not misquoting you, you said, yeah, banking works. And you also said social media, the host was asking about Twitter and Facebook and taking them. I said, social media works, banking works. So why do we need DeFi? And we'll come on to decentralized social media in a second, but what's the kind of like the one-liner or the Twitter version of why we need DeFi?
Yeah, so there's always kind of like the more of like a fundamental, or I would say like idealistic viewpoints for decentralization, why it's better, keeping position of your property with crypto in general. But currently, like, the banking works to some extent. It doesn't work for everyone. There's a lot of issues with access to finance, even access to banking in many industries. And in terms of social, there's social media platforms where you can share your ideas and thoughts. And the way I see it is that if you really want to gain adoption to bigger audience, you have to build something that is better, faster, and stronger. And I think that's the way to actually get market share, and then show, because what we build, you also have these features that makes it better for you as a user. But many of the things that are built in DeFi and even in Web3 social and for example, the Lens protocol are benefits. They're like feature benefits for the users. For example, in DeFi, it's a transparent market. You have full transparency of what you are doing. That's a benefit. So that's a feature that allows you to price the risk way more better. You have smart contract execution, meaning that the smart contract will enforce all the transactions without an exception. So you have that innovation, and also things move very fast. So you don't have to wait someone's confirmation, except the blockchain, to make a transaction. So that's and also part. All of these are part of faster, better, and stronger, whatever order you want to put them. And in Lens protocol, in Web3 social, being able to create your profile once, and access with that profile into many of these applications, having your followers without losing them or leaving them behind, that's a better feature that we have in traditional social media. Being able to create, for example, content, user-generated content, and your audience being able to collect them as NFTs, for example, and you are able as a creator to monetize, or anyone who is a user, that's a feature as well. So it's all about making things better than having the idealistic approach. The more we build better software, better systems, the more adoption we'll get. I believe in that.
Now, let's just park the ideological stuff and we'll come back to it, like the libertarian argument and then the sense of self-ownership, whether it's self-custody of financial assets or social assets. We'll come back to that in a few minutes, but the let's talk about the kind of user adoption curve, as in what's going to drive it, as in what you're seeing already in the last few years with DeFi. What's in your experience been driving DeFi adoption, both amongst whether it's retail or institutional, and then also now in the more recent past, your return to social media and building decentralized social media. Talk a little bit about sort of in the real world, if you like. That's a terrible phrase, but like in the real world, what's been driving adoption, both first in finance and then in social media, of decentralized systems?
I think it boils down to basically the same idea of building better things that are more useful, and based on that is also more opportunities. So there's this idea of actually being early in the space and being early in, let's say, DeFi and taking advantage of the opportunities, being in early in social media, and being able to create an audience there when it's still small and then expand that audience. It's definitely like has to do a lot on those, but also people are coming because you have a better system. Now, the biggest challenge obviously is the jump into the space, because there's so many new concepts and new things, which is also kind of like challenging for new users. But I would argue also that once you make the leap to Web3, it's relatively easy to use the applications. For example, that if you don't want one particular DeFi protocol, you can go to another application just by browsing in your tab browser or Explorer, and then you can just connect your wallet and you can move your funds there. And this is something that is like very frictionless, and you can see that transparently on the blockchain what is happening. So I think the people who came at this point are drawn by the idea of the opportunities and how it could help them. The people who are not here yet are basically still seeing it as very new, and they need more tools to understand, or more exciting things that makes them to come. A good example is DeFi, because finance is something that is, I cared a lot and growing up, but not everyone cares about finance. They care about making income, being able to spend, maybe even save some money. But there might be more people caring about social media, owning your audience, earning on your audience. Those are things are very important. And maybe the next thing is gaming. Maybe it's about you want to play games where you can own those assets, and you can actually go to another game and wear the same skins you wear in the previous game. So I think it's just like fulfilling the needs of all the audiences that are. And traditionally, the blockchain audience started from finance, because Bitcoin, as one of the first use cases, was trying to solve a financial problem, and same for DeFi. No, you're absolutely right. The if you like, the TAM for culture or the TAM for social is bigger than the TAM for finance, right? Because everyone has not almost everyone is interested in social. In terms of sort of thinking about where we go from here, so decentralized social media is it's still in a beta phase, right? It's not really out there in the wild, is it? No, because I would say that alpha, because we have at Lens Protocol. There's roughly 110,000 profiles minted, and it's not completely. Lens Protocol is not completely open access at this point, because it's relatively new protocol. It was deployed 6 months ago, but effectively there's a good community in one of the applications. When you go to Lenser, or you go to Orb, or there's another one, Butterfly, anyone can create an application and curate the audience and experience. But it's very early, but when you go to these applications, you see that, the experience isn't any different than using a traditional application on internet or on your phone. So I think that's a big step towards actually ensuring that normal people can use Web3 social in the future.
But what's the user experience or the journey like if someone out there who's not amongst those 100,000 odd users already, try to explain to them like what it's like when I set up a Web2 social application, we kind of all know how it works, but how's it like in a Web3 world? I'm just aware that we've actually not defined Web3 in this whole conversation, but never mind. That's another topic altogether. But how do you like, just explain the kind of setup process and how easy or intuitive it is for people to access Web3 social media?
I mean, the first thing is to basically claim a profile. Once you claim the profile, the onboarding is pretty much, you might tell like what are you interested in, and then you can start posting, and then you go one of the applications that are built on top of the Lens protocol. So there's one called Orb, for example, which is a mobile facing, and Butterfly, for example. There's also one called Lenser, which is an app built in 2 weeks during a hackathon by community developers. And regardless of which application you use, once you connect your wallet, what happens is that you see all your followers, your curation, and this is the significant difference, because if you go from Twitter to TikTok, your followers are stuck in those platforms databases. You can't really you can't really carry your audience. You really are giving everything to those platforms. So that's the different part.
I think the last few months have really brought it to life, right? Because before it was very theoretical, like why do we need why do we need our own social, I don't know, we're happy on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and now people are like, oh my god, how do I port all my contacts from Twitter to whatever, Mastodon or whatever? It's a pain. It's a pain.
And it's actually like, it's even like not fully possible, because you might not have the people in those other platforms, and the issue in traditional, it doesn't
work.
Apps,
they're not there. I tried.
yeah, exactly, and that's why you go back to the previous one. And those applications, they can tailor the user experience the way they want to, and you can't really do anything, because all your social capital is locked in those applications.
So what are people doing at the moment? And it's an alpha phase, but what are they doing? Is it the same as they'd be doing on Twitter and Facebook, or is it other things?
There's actually 3 interesting things that people are doing. So one is, there's a lot of discussions about different products, engineering, and more kind of like a builder discussion. The second type of discussion is more about music. So there's a lot of creators there that are utilizing the Lens protocol, because all the content that they create, their audience can actually collect as NFTs as well. So that's a nice way to monetize them. And it's quite nice because you can create music NFTs across Web3, but there is no place to share. And in Lens protocol, you can actually share, but you can post directly the music, the content that becomes a music NFT. And then the last one that is quite interesting is memes and food pictures. So people are posting what they're eating, and also people are creating memes and posting there and monetizing actually those memes. So it's very early to say like what direction it takes, but because it's a protocol, I assume that the applications are the ones that are curating the directions in general.
Food, music, memes, all the good stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Now we're coming towards the end of this podcast, but maybe we have time for a couple more questions before we wrap up. One on Web3 and the metaverse, and then one on just more broadly on software and computing. On On Web3, we didn't define anywhere. We kind of talked about what Web3 is, but if you had to give us a TLDR about how to define Web3, or suggest to the audience who are listening to this some sources or resources they could go and look up to learn more about kind of what is Web3, what's your favorite definition? What's your favorite reading material or podcast on Web3 for us to go and learn more about it for the audience?
I mean, I would say like Bankless is quite good because it's, they put a lot of effort for educating newcomers. They also post in LensTube. So LensTube is kind of like community initiative to make video streaming platform on Lens Protocol. Rehash is another one that is existing there. I recommend to take a look. But in overall, like what's exciting to understand is that in the web, like if you look at how internet has been evolved, so the web 1 version, when I at my friend's computer, it's about creating pages and showing data. Web 2 was about being able to interact. So you go to a platform, you could share ideas, interact and comment. And that was very exciting. And now in Web 3, it's also about, it's not only about interactions, but ownership. So users can actually own not only their assets, such as, for example, if you own your Bitcoin, Ethereum, Aave, whatever that might be, you have that position, but you can also own your profile. So you can own the relationship you have with your followers, and no one can take that away from you. And you can also be part of governing those protocols as well. So Web3 is about creating a system where you have a voice, but you are also part of those communities, and you have ownership and access to these networks. So you shouldn't be able to be restricted on accessing the same yield opportunities or the same currency as other people are using globally, or, for example, interacting on social media with your own closest audience. So I think it derives quite a lot towards the ownership aspect.
And if I think about a hype cycle or an interest curve or a Google search trend kind of, Web3 and also very specific in metaverse, which partly overlaps with Web3, but is also can be very Web2. There's a lot of excitement around that, and for the better word, hype around autumn 2021 or fall 2021, and then it kind of carried on, and then up to 2022 early, and then it seems to have just kind of gone away. And is that simply token prices, risk asset prices, crypto prices came down? Is the underlying kind of sort of, if you like, build activity still there? Or, because oftentimes when I step outside that very small world instead of DeFi, and I say to people, hey, let's talk about, I don't know, Web3 or metaverse, that was last year.
I
come back in 2025.
Yeah. I think the way it works, for example, like, for example, internet it's still very infant, right? So it has enormous growth and enormous innovation going on, like more now than ever before, right? So, and there's also like subcategories that are, having that innovation as well. Like it might, and there's hundreds of, like thousands of more even like categories on the internet that are just growing and part of that hype cycle. And I think in Web3 we'll see the same, that we'll see some excitement around, for example, Web3 social. We see excitement around scalability and using ZK, zero knowledge proofs, as a technology to scale. Part of the things that are part of Web3. But we also will see again, DeFi, one category of DeFi coming again, and this is exciting. So I think the innovation will come. It's just a matter of time. What is important to build at a particular time frame?
My last question, I know we're out of time. My last question, last question, to sort of wrap it back to Finland, to the start of the conversation, and also your kind of early years. You talked about how the Linux open source movement, obviously got Finnish roots, and many of the OGs were and still are quite anti-blockchain. And when you think about their critique, or just in the context of software and coding overall, how do you kind of put those two strands together of kind of that, because blockchain has so much of that open source kind of, culture, yet some of these OGs of open source, is this a generational thing? I don't know.
I think it is a bit, but it also is about the idea of how I was grown up. So I had always access to internet, and I think for me, like knowing how it helped me individually, I can relate to how, for example, open source permissionless technologies where everyone has equal access to same opportunities can actually do to individuals, and how it can empower. I think that's the main thing. And open source is a way to actually spread good technology very quickly, because if you don't put restrictions on the usage, it means that there's more likeliness for the adoption if that software is relevant. So I think it's about seeing how it helped me, and how how actually Web3 can help other people in the future.
And Stani, if people want to learn more about either Lens Protocol, Lenster, Aave, the work you do, your team, what's the best way for them to learn more and keep in touch? Just follow you on Twitter? I don't know.
So you can DM me on Twitter if you want a Lens profile. And I do most of my posting on Lens Protocol these days, but I'm still active on Twitter. And will be in the future. So you can message me in DM, and I will help you there. And on the Lens Protocol, I'm stani.lens, so you can follow me afterwards there as well when you get your profile.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure to host you on the first of the 2023 series of our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here, Ronit.
It's all my pleasure.